Welcome everybody to the Soil Matters and welcome to Leah Oram from QuadAG. Leighton, Av, you guys have both talked to this young lady, so I'll jump off and I'll let you guys have a hell of a good show.
All right, thank you. Av, would you like the honors of introduction today? Uh-oh. All right, I guess I'll introduce you. Leah, welcome to the show, and I'm really interested in hearing how you ended up to where you are today, because you definitely took a left turn in your life.
Funny how that is. Yeah. I think it's more a door opens and you either charge through it or you neglect it. And I chose to charge through the door. I basically came from a marketing background. I've worked in commercial sales in a lot of unsatisfying verticals, although the jobs that I had were very satisfying at those times and I learned a lot from them, but it left something a little ungratified. And then we just happened to be introduced to this really amazing farmer who crafts his own formulations. And we just really connected on a personal level, but also seeing the beautiful things that he was doing in agriculture and livestock. And my husband and I just wanted to be a part of it. So we founded our company and we initially just started focusing on the agriculture side, and then we slowly scaled out into other verticals, but we've really focused on how soil is such an important part of our ecology, and really diving down into that rabbit hole and it goes deep. So I still have much to learn, and I've always thought of myself as a consummate student, so I'm always open to learning new things. And this is just something that we've found that's really resonated with us, and how we can make a positive impact on the world. And food security and agriculture and livestock has become a really important part of our sustenance and for people to survive. It's a really important part of our existence. So taking care of that is our responsibility.
Amen to that. And yeah, I've only agree with you when I say you can't stop learning. I mean, as soon as you stop learning, you become an expert that knew something somewhere in time, because there's still so much to discover.
Absolutely.
Incredible. So, all right, let's talk a little bit about the company that you formed, and what are you actually doing?
So QuadAG is one of our brands. We formed the Quad Agency as a means to propel and advocate for humic and fulvic acids, so humic substances, as part of supplementation. So we focus on plants, animals, and humans. But QuadAG in particular is focusing on humic and fulvic substances in cultivation, in farming, whether that's indoor, outdoor. We've worked in every sort of grow modality, from living soil and compost teas all the way to aeroponics. So we really want to bring the essence of what makes soil so beautiful and functional, which our humic and fulvic is a big part of that. There's a whole lot of biology that goes along with that as well, but we complement that. But it's a safe, I've sort of referred to it as the gateway biostimulant that allows people to sort of tinker into the biostimulant side of things without it being overly complicated, being compromising of their system, whatever their grow system is. But we can bring the essence of that soil into greenhouse agriculture and other forms of greenhouse or controlled environment agriculture, and bring that magic of what is soil and what makes soil work so well with plants into an environment that does not conform with soil. So we're sort of in that mission of bringing that true essence of what makes soil beautiful and the exchange of nutrients into an environment that is not typical. Plants don't naturally grow in an inert environment. So how do you bring some of that nature without the contamination, which is sort of
one thing that you said that I'd really love to suss out was it brings some of the magic of soil. So for the audience, if you don't understand the breakdown process, we call them primary, secondary, and tertiary metabolites. And that's essentially what humic and fulvics are, because they're part of the breakdown process. We tend to call it biogeochemical interactions or reactions. They get so complex, they're so quick. Some of them are longer, but bottom line is that something that we can qualify, we just can't quantify yet at this point in time. But that's the beauty of what you're talking about. Av, welcome back. I don't know what happened. Blew up, disappeared.
I think StreamYard doesn't really like the Maritimes, so I'm struggling to stay on. But it works on my phone. My apologies. I'm sure Leah's got more to say now.
Welcome back.
So we were just talking about how what she's doing is actually kind of bringing in some of the magic that happens within the soil process or the biogeochemical reactions that are occurring in the soil itself. So that's kind of where we are in the conversation. But yeah, and I think that so many people don't understand the value for both humans and animals with these materials, that they're being starved of at this point in time. Whereas before, when they were natural in the natural environment, they'd rip up a plant and they'd eat it, and they'd eat the roots too. So they would get the benefits of the fulvic and humic acids. Whereas they're with the feed rates and recipes and formulas, they're just not getting that. So what have you found in animal health? Let's start there as far as
sure. So with animal health, and this is all livestock and poultry that has been tested. Now we're in Canada, so we have full range of all livestock breeds and species, as well as poultry. What they're finding is, and what's being found pretty consistently is overall animal health has improved greatly. And when you're dealing with livestock animals, especially livestock for food chain, so for human consumption, they are all natural. So they're all certified and rated and approved for animal consumption, for human, ultimately for human consumption. What we're finding is improved health overall for the animals, better efficiency of nutrient uptake. So just like you'd see in plants, you're seeing in animals as well. Humic in particular helps to protect the mucus lining of the gut tract. It's very beneficial in ruminating animals. Again, it reduces the gassing effect of their digestion. They're better able to absorb proteins from their food. So they get lower gas rates in a barn environment, because you're dealing with commercial environments. There's lower ammonia rate, which means that it's more hospitable environment for those animals and the workers who are working in those environments. Trying to lean towards making it a healthier, happier environment where those animals only have one bad day is the ultimate goal. It's not I'm not against veganism, and everyone has their culinary choice, but there are still going to be people that will want to eat proteins and animal proteins. So making it a healthier environment for them, for the workers. They're from a tactical standpoint, from livestock operators, they're looking at how do you reduce the cost of farming, because it's always the biggest issue. So feed conversion is a huge part of, if the animals can get more nutrients out of the food that they're consuming, then you can be a bit more conservative on the rations. It's not starving the animals, just they're utilizing those nutrients more efficiently. Subsequently, with humic and fulvic as part of the diet, their manure becomes more bioavailable nutrients as well. So when they're utilizing that manure as part of their fertilizer program and keeping the circular economy going and keeping it not entirely closed loop, but somewhat closing the loop a little bit, you're able to improve the efficiency of those nutrients in the soil that raises the crops to feed those animals. So we're looking at that circular economy and how do we make it more efficient and cost effective for the farmers, but also having healthier, happier animals that can get over illness faster. They can get to market weight faster, which means they're less cost on the farmer. This farmer can then turn more over and they have a better livelihood, really.
So one of the amazing things you just said was less ammonia in the environment. I don't know if you've read many of the studies, but it's incredible how badly that affects or negatively affects the animal's health, well-being, ability to function, like you said, get to market weight, all of those key things. Because think about it, if you are stuck in an environment where you were breathing poor quality air, that's half your life right there, is that exchange, that gas exchange, and how important it is. There was
sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say there were some incredible studies on poultry specifically. I have not read many on ruminants or cows milking or meat otherwise, but maybe could you talk a little bit more on just that one piece?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. Think about ammonia is a gas that settles. So they're breathing in the environment where the gas settles. So if you look at swine, poultry, or other sort of more ground feeding animals, for the most part, bovine can at least raise their heads a little bit above that line, but still they're immersed in that space. When you can reduce the ppm of the ammonia in the barn environment, and like Canada's standards is they want it to be at least down to 25 ppm. And at 25 ppm, animals can still suffer from lesions and respiratory distress, and that stress leads to cortisol. Cortisol can inhibit their digestion and their uptake. It's a cascading thing. So if you can reduce the ammonia in those barn systems, you have less stress that those animals are living, there's less stress on the animal. They're living happier, healthier lives. And they produce a better quality meat. If they're digesting properly, they're taking in the proper nutrients. All those things compound and improve the product, but also the journey that those animals have in their lives. So there's definitely been a huge increase in the productivity in those environments commercially, the quality of life of the animals, of the people working there, because they're also impacted by a highly gaseous area and being in a confined space. And as you mentioned, if they're not pasture raised or don't have the opportunity to be pasture raised, they have no access to humic and fulvic as part of their diet, which they would normally in the wild or at least in a pasture raised environment. They don't have access to that, then they're not going to have, you have to supplement it. And it's the same thing with people. When our food is not grown in rich, healthy soil, we don't have access to fulvic acid. Fulvic acid does the same thing for the human body as it does for animals, as it does for plants. Its role is a chelator. So it is going to pick up nutrients and help your body digest it. It allows for those nutrients to pass through cell walls and tissue walls a lot easier. So it's really beneficial in the livestock space because you can improve the overall health of those animals and produce a better quality product in the end. And it should cost the farmers a little bit less because they're not only able to utilize a little bit less, there's less waste in the food, in the feed that they're producing or providing to those animals. But as I mentioned, their manure becomes a part of their system because very rarely will you find a cattle farm or any livestock farm that isn't trying to produce some of their own feed and feedstock. So being able to support that is something that's become sort of a big part of what our initiative is.
Leah, are you seeing it used almost exclusively as a feed additive in livestock production, or are people using it as a spray for bedding or just on compost or anything like that?
It depends on how pioneering the farm is. There are lots of studies that are coming out on livestock because it's obviously it's an industry that's heavily invested in for R&D and research. Not so much on the companion or hobby side of animal health. But we are seeing that there's a lot more in that vein in terms of feedlot efficiencies, weaning as well. It's another big area is maintaining the young livestock health as they're weaning. There's a period called scour, which is basically diarrhea. It's a transition from mother's milk onto their grain diets. And there's that period of time, the longer it is, the more their body weight goes down. So overall health, even through that phase, is becoming more and more apparent. And so you're seeing a greater adoption, I see. But sometimes the way into working with some of these farms is to work on their field, show them that humic and fulvic can have a real impact in the the grain and whatever they're raising, whatever the crop they're raising for those livestock, and then work our way in the other way. So it works in tandem for the most part, but a lot of times, we're trying to help with the animal health because it's a big concern. It's a huge investment for these types of farms. And it's you'll see it sort of either way.
And of course, that Leighton's all about fish as well.
Yes.
Where does humic and fulvic fit into the fish world?
So interestingly, it fits really well into the aquaculture side of things, where we've got some data from our products there. We're just waiting for the study to be released. So there's not a whole lot that I can get into on that specifically, but on a generality standpoint, there is definitely an increase in hatch rates. So the carbon from humic can actually coat the cell walls of those eggs as a protective layer, and humic acid has an ability to reduce gram-negative bacteria, so it can help reduce the compromise of those eggs to allow better hatch-through rate. So you get better swim-through rates of those hatchlings to almost double. So where you might see like 40 to 50% hatch-through rate in an untreated tank, a treated tank might see between 80 to 90% hatch-through rate, which from an ecological conservancy standpoint means if you're running a hatchery to help maintain the fish stock in a stream, so for like spawning fish, for example, salmonoid species, you're going to get a better hatch-through rate. They're going to come back. And that's what we're looking for, is that better cycling back years later of those same fish that have spawned and were raised in that stream and in that ecosystem, for them to come back and spawn again. So having that increased rate is going to be very, very important. When we start looking at including humic and fulvic as part of the pellet feed system, say in farmed fish of various types, of whether that's on land pen salmon, or on land pen fish, or in situ in actual like wild penned or ocean penned rather, they're fed pellets. And so if you can feed them the humic and fulvic through the pellets, because obviously pouring a liquid in a liquid is not going to work, they can then consume that, and it acts as a gut modifier as well. So we're getting data back on the gut biome as well of these fish to determine the overall benefit between the treated and untreated as well. So if you, again, can see that the gut biome is equally as important and it serves the same function that the soil does for plants, if you look at them in that same vein, is they're playing the same role. It's just a different organism that they're working with.
So I got to add something on that one. Before I get too down the rabbit hole on fulvic acid and the benefits of the gut, a lot of people don't understand that fish have two stomachs. One is outside, the biofilm that's coated to their body. That's why they have such an incredible feed conversion rate, is because they're absorbing a tremendous amount of nutrient on through biofilm digestion, and it's going directly in between the scales into the fish itself. So I think that in many ways, especially in those ocean pens, if you were feeding them pellets, they'll always crash the surface, because you don't want sinking pellets, obviously, because you're going to lose them. So while the fish are crashing, if you were spraying humic acid on the fish themselves, you probably might get a really interesting reaction on their second stomach, which is their biological biofilm.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind, because when we talked at Grow Up, I was just like, my head just went fucking sideways, because I started thinking about what you're doing and the way you're approaching it. And I'm in the middle of dealing with this muncher team and understanding more of what's called aerobic digestion, and the benefits that through aerobic digestion you can get. And one of the key things is that mucus lining in the stomach, and how important that is. And that's what makes me think that you are getting those increased reactions, not only through that supporting the gut mucus with the humics, but you're getting better digestion through into intercellular with the fulvic. So you've got like this perfect storm of things that are being provided to the animals, whether they're aquatic or terrestrial.
Absolutely. My analogy is humic is like building the bigger dinner plate, and the fulvic is a bigger fork. So whatever the organism is you're better able to digest. You're protecting the beneficial and probiotic bacteria that you want because they're contributing, and you're reducing the gram-negative bacteria, which is pathogenic. So if you're able to balance that out and still use more of a carrier, the fulvic acts as that carrier, you get better uptake of those nutrients. So yeah, it's in the livestock side of things and on the aquaculture side of things, the where you're talking about that the biofilm on the exterior of the fish. I mean, this is why you see so many parasites and everything on the exterior of those fish, especially in those outdoor pens, is that they're exposed to it and they have no protection to it because everything's dysfunctional. So if we're able to at least get fulvic and humic on the inside, then we're at least better able to, or the animal's better able to digest and assimilate and have a bit more immunity and improve that exterior function.
You know, that was a constant conversation in aquaculture was parasites and the problems with them. One of the things I learned early on was to eliminate any anaerobic pockets, and this is the unfortunate part of heavy-duty commercial fish farming, is that the amount of waste that's created in the aquaculture system, and I want to say like in the water itself, is always an issue. And, you know, again, like because of commercial fishing and the relationship of how many fish they can stuff in that pen based on the dollars and cents at the end of the day, the ROI, which is always so incredible or is so important in you know, the money, that's why they're there, is to make money. I could just see endless benefits of giving this to them and spraying it on them too, because you're going to increase that ability to fight off the parasites. Because again, it's like we talk about full plant potential or genetic potential in plants. Yeah. Well, that same thing can be reached with our food sources if you provide these basic, super important nutrients like the chelating value of humic and the delivery of fulvic. It's just a win-win.
It is. I mean, and that's why they're complemented in nature. So
yes.
Why not just take that and introduce it into unnatural environments or unnatural systems or where things are dysfunctional?
So this is off topic, but how did you end up jumping into this?
I'm a hippie at heart. I grew up on Vancouver Island. I grew up just being surrounded by nature. I was in a medical family, so I am in a medical family. So just growing up around science and finding a way to merge the two things, it was a journey to get to where we are. But as soon as we found it, as soon as I was talking with the owner of this company that we've partnered with, and hearing their story and just that familial feeling of like, I want to be a part of this somehow. I've got to figure out a way to be a part of this. So we've just developed brands and we've brought it into these different markets. And we just found something that's, I don't know, it's a heart song. I don't know how else to say it. We found something that really spoke to us viscerally. And it was just like, this is something that we need to do.
Soul food.
Totally.
Right?
Totally. We're the custodians of our earth, and we all are. This is my sense of responsibility, is that if I can contribute and this is the way in which I can contribute, then that's what I'll do.
Yeah. And it's funny. I think that we call them large-spirited humans. You have small-spirited humans who are mean and nasty and, you know, narcissistic, but then you have large-spirited people, and the large-spirited people tend to gravitate towards things that are, you know, the foundation of all life, soil, right? Life, health, you know, all of those things, and they bring such a great return, not monetarily, but, you know, making you feel better as a human and more excited to get up each day.
Totally.
But anyway, so all right, Av, looks like he's got a question. Go ahead.
I think this is a great opportunity, Leah. Do you want to talk a little bit about Hiram right now? I think the way Leighton just described people and good, big-spirited humans, I think that's Hiram in a nutshell.
I think that's Hiram in a nutshell. Yeah. So Hiram is the gentleman who has created these formulas, and he is a brilliant scientist at heart, but he is a farmer by trade, and he's a cash cropper, and he raises pigs, and his whole family is involved in their whole operations. And he's just one of the most incredibly humble and overly humble individuals, and he will never accolade himself. Everyone's always having to say, no, Hiram's so much more. Yeah, just a really, really, truly wonderful person who's spent over 25, probably close to 30 years now working and developing his own way of extracting humic and fulvics. And he's spent a long time doing this, and he's worked tirelessly, not only as a farmer, but in developing these formulations and figuring out the right way to position them, and not getting into the nutrient side of things, because people are going to have their own method of providing nourishment, whether it's to their plants or their animals. It's not diving into that side of things, but really just focusing on how to bring these very vital components of nature into everyone's lives, and bringing it into almost common knowledge for people to really understand that there's something much more important than just putting it in your soil to grow plants. It really is something that's beneficial to plants, animals, and humans. Really, every organism everything that exists will inevitably break down and humify and become these components. So it is just sort of life recycling itself. So
he's got an amazing ability to, speak to a biodynamic, an organic farmer, and speak at their level. But he could also speak to that farmer who has just sprayed some glyphosate, some Roundup, and then talk about the power and the ability of humic acid, making sure that manganese that's now become harder for that plant to uptake, that it's going to be in a reduced form because of the humic acid. And so he can speak at having Hiram speak to farmers is just amazing to watch, because it's just so much respect for the farmer, and then speaking at whatever level they're at. And it's great to see. And that's a big reason why I'm such a big fan of the QuadAG products. And yeah, just looking forward to having Leah share a few more of those case studies where it does talk about how if you were a bit on the fence, and really, humic substances are by far the largest selling biostimulant in the market. But as you mentioned, it's the quality of the product, and that's where you want to be distinguishing it, because not all humic substances and humic acids, fulvic acids are created equal.
No. And maybe that's a good opportunity to sort of dive into a little bit of the differences that I've come across. So every time we come across a humic or fulvic product, we buy it, and then we send it to a lab so that we have a good understanding of what that product profile is. So there's a few different sources where you can extract humic and fulvic acids from. There's basically they're old water sediments that have humified in really extended periods of rot to the tune of hundreds of thousands of years in many cases. Where we source our product is from a material called leonardite. It's a soft brown coal. It's very nutrient rich. It's very dense. But it's not at a lignified state. So it's perceived as the optimal source for humic and fulvics. We have two separate extraction processes. So one is specific to humic acid and one specific to fulvic acid. So where this proprietary process really has created an end product that is not only really highly soluble, because we only extract into a liquid, so we don't extract, dehydrate down into a powder and then reconstitute into a liquid. We lose some of the sort of essence of what makes our product a little bit different. Our humic acid is a very high concentration, and depending on which test you run on it, and there are different tests. So if you see a percentage on a label, it really helps to understand what test that percentage it was derived from. One would be a precipitate test. You're often going to see that percentage is going to be a little bit lower because it's testing for the actual carbon in that product. The other test would be a more colorimetric or spectrometry test, and that one's going to be more about light refraction. So it's about light density getting through. So you'll tend to see a higher percentage in those types of products. Some of the confusion around humic and fulvic, especially about fulvic, is there's certain regions, particularly in the States, California, that doesn't recognize fulvic acid. And so everything has to be labeled humic. And so it causes a lot of confusion when people are trying to understand, what is this product? What am I buying it for? And if they do a little bit of research and they understand they want a humic for this type of role or this function, and they want a fulvic for this function, in California, you can't identify the different products. You need to be outside of California or use a VPN so that your IP address is outside of California in order to get that material. You're not allowed to access it if you're in California, which is bizarre. Up until recently, Oregon was the same, but they've changed their tune and they've shifted. And so they now accept fulvic acid as an ingredient, and we're allowed to disclose that. But that being said, when humic acid is extracted, it's going to carry a negative charge. It's so heavy with carbon that it replicates the soil. Soil has a negative charge. Your nutrients typically will have for the most part, will have a positive charge. And it's this magnetism between that negative charge and the positive charge. So in the soil environment, your negatively charged soil is going to hold on to a certain capacity of those positively charged ions and allow for better migration into the plant. Where humic acid has a deeper negative charge, like ours has a very deep negative charge to about negative 450, you're going to hold on to a whole lot more water and nutrients. You get better water retention within the media that you're growing in, whatever it is, and you better retention of nutrients as well that the plants can then access at leisure. So fulvic acid on the other side is actually a component of the humic acid molecule, but it can also be extracted independently. It's 45% oxygen. It's a very powerful, effective chelator for such a tiny molecule, and it carries a positive charge. It has a unique ability, even though it's positively charged, to be able to hold on to positively charged ions, especially the really stubborn ones like calcium and magnesium, which adds to its benefit in a lot of plant agriculture. Again, that magnetism, that gravitation between the positive and negative, when the two are used together, there's just this magic that typically happens in the soil. You can bring that into an indoor environment. You can bring that into a hydroponic environment. You can create that relationship, and you can convince the plants that you're growing that they are in an organic matter rich environment, even if they're in a cocoa or if they're in a rock wall or if they're in a deep water culture. You convince the plant that they're in that environment and they respond accordingly, which is amazing to see. When you see that side-by-side comparison, well, that's the only difference, is that they've added humic and fulvic. To see that difference in the physiology of the plants, it's really beautiful to see. When people overlook the humic and fulvic, or if they've started to explore humic and fulvic, it is, and I think Av, you had dropped off at this point, humic and fulvic really is the gateway biostimulant. Like if you're intimidated by the microbiology or you're intimidated by the mycorrhiza, you don't want to commit to that because you think it's too much or you might screw it up. Humic and fulvic is a really easy way to get into that side of agriculture. It brings some regenerative components into however you're growing, because it makes a big difference. And it's such a small component that can have such a big impact. So I'm always excited when people do integrate it into their system and they're like, yep, I can see it. It's night and day. It's a really exciting thing to see that transition from somebody who's been dedicated to salts, that's all they're going to do, until like, okay, maybe this is a good, like it's a stepping stone. And then they can follow a little bit farther down that path and start to explore different beneficial microbes that they can start to see that will actually improve more than just the soil, but also if they're running it through their reservoir, they can also address biofilm. They can address a lot of different things by incorporating these additives that are not just about the plant, it's about the whole ecosystem. So it's helping people sort of see outside of just plant, nourish the plant, nourish the plant. It's like you feed the soil is always intended to feed the plant. So you feed the soil will feed the plant.
It was one of the interesting things to trying to get some of the conventional growers using humic acid, and this is probably about 20 years ago, and the way I got them to use it, and I was hoping that they'd use it for its biostimulant practices, but they had reservoirs in their greenhouses. Of course, their reservoirs were transparent, and of course algae was growing in it. So I said, well, start using some humic acid. It'll give a color to the water, and of course they started realizing that there was no more biofilm in their emitters, and became big users of humic acid from that point. But I also wanted to just, and I don't mean this to be a plug for QuadAG products, but by all means, it is a great line of products. But there's something that's unique about your humic and fulvic, is that their pHs are representative of their extraction methodology, whereas I often find the pHs are often altered in other products. Do you care to comment on that, or are you familiar with that?
Well, I can speak a little bit about just in the way that they obviously function really well. Humic acid is only soluble at an alkaline pH, so you're very limited in the range in which you can use a humic acid. If you're operating in a highly acidic environment, you are going to have precipitate. You are going to have sediment. Which is something that we want to avoid, especially in like a line-fed system or fertigation system. You don't want any clogging of that infrastructure. It's expensive and it's timely and costly to have to clean it out. Fulvic acid, it can be extracted and it's soluble at any pH. We keep ours at a very low pH because we find that in a reservoir environment, oftentimes you're looking to try to buffer down a little bit, and it's a chelator, so you want it to bind to the nutrients. It functions at all pH, but if we extract it out and keep it at a low pH, then it actually works as a natural pH down. So you're not adding chemical to pH down. You can just use fulvic acid, which is going to provide a pH down. Our phenolic product is our pure fulvic acid. It pHs down at a reasonable rate, like not over the top, but like at a reasonable rate. It's pretty foolproof. But you're using it also as an uptake promoter. Yeah. So you're using it to improve the bioavailability of the nutrients you're putting into that reservoir or into that feed, so that you have better uptake and digestion of those nutrients.
And for any organic grower who's using some soluble nutrients and needs to pH down, it's what a great opportunity, because a lot of folks will try dropping their pH with citric acid. It just doesn't work as well. So
not the same.
Great opportunity.
And it's short-lived. Yeah. And that's the challenge, is that it buffers down for a short bit, but then if you leave it too long, or if it sits too long, it's going to start to climb up and creep up again. So you're constantly, and then if you overdo it, then you're constantly doing this dance. Yeah. And this is where I find a lot of people get like, oh, it's too much. And they kind of recoil against going that regenerative or more or natural nutrient options and going down that path, because it can be more complicated. If they don't have the time or the bandwidth, they just want the nutrients to work. This is a really great way that you can make it very safe to have, and it also allows for a window for pH swings. So if you do have a pH swing, when you have fulvic acid in the system, it does allow for your plants to self-regulate. So even if the pH is a little high or if it's a little low, it does allow your plant, you have a bit more time to make those corrections without the plant stressing. So
I find it gives you a lot of credit for that too. I'm not sure if that's warranted, but in terms of creating a more of a pH buffer, I feel like humic acid allows that forgiveness as well.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. I find that with when people are looking at, well, every grower has, and the array of different growers that we've worked with, from small hobby farms to very large commercial facilities, balancing not only just the pH of their system, but also the ppm. So when their ppm shoots up and they need to, you know, they're shifting programs, they're moving into a flower program, or they're trying to accelerate at the late stage in flower. Oftentimes, depending on the nutrients, they're driving their ppm up. We've had guys just for fun that have used one of our products, does have a nitrogen additive to it, and they've driven the ppm upwards of 2,700, and it still didn't stress the plants out. And it wasn't until they reached a little over 2,900 ppm that they started to see the stress present, and so they dialed it back, and then everything kind of resolved. But they were surprised that they were able to get the formulation that hot and have the nutrients, like that type of nutrient load in the reservoir without the plant stressing out. And I'm like, yeah, because fulvic acid is in there and it's allowing the plant to regulate itself, because not only chelation works both ways, it's in and out. So chelation in is what's going to allow those tougher, bigger molecules and those ions to come into the plant, but it also allows the plant to expel nutrients or excess and waste or toxins that it doesn't need. So you get better regulation, self-regulation, and so you get a lot better uptake, better performance, but you're not going to see those stressors.
You know, you just hit a home run with that. And pH is such an issue that people don't understand. And yeah, you know, pH yo-yoing is what you were talking about, where you're up, down, is horrible for the biology, for the ecology, and the plant itself. It's you might as well just start over at that point if you're yo-yoing.
Yeah,
you're never going to get potential or genetic potential. And yeah, you're so right on the fact that both of these acids, these organic acids, do allow the plant to regulate its own pH. Now, this was something that I talked about years ago, and everybody laughed at me. I'm like, no, in the rhizosphere, the plant has the ability to create these compounds to adjust for pH that it doesn't want to be in, or for adjusting the pH to harvest things that they want. Because remember, pH is the ultimate regulator of the ability for nutrients to be solubilized. So again, you know, I love to hear the proprietary knowledge, but I know you can't share that because I've played with this for years, and I can pretty much kind of guess what you're doing. And I think that's why this particular product shines. Bob Faust, I think we talked about him. He's always been my hero for what he did and went through to get humic acid brought to the attention of Americans. And he's probably the reason why they finally accept fulvic in Oregon. And California is just a bunch of fucking idiots. So, you know, I love what he did. He calls it full power.
There are a few gray hairs because of them.
You have no idea how really bad it is.
It took 2.5 years to get our OIM through California.
Oh yeah, no doubt. And that, you're lucky. That's pretty quick.
It was tenacity, but
yeah, that's what it takes. And those regulators, they'll just sit on their haunches. They don't care. But and then they want you to hire a consultant, and that consultant and them go out for beers every Friday night and laugh at how much they've charged you to get through your regulatory shit. Yeah, don't get me started.
We didn't go through any consultants.
Well, and getting that done in 2.5 years is miraculous. So
yeah,
kudos. But I think, you know, again, that is one of the most important things that people don't understand about humic and fulvic. It's all about the extraction. If you're extracting with really, really harsh chemicals, that's usually why you get those pHs too high or too low. But if you're using other processes, which I believe you are, you're not going to get those kinds of situations. You're not going to get those residual acids and bases coming through on the product.
Yeah.
And the other side of that too is the lenadite itself. You know, Av wanted to talk about silt, and we never really got a chance to go down that rabbit hole. But essentially, that's what that lenadite is a silt that hasn't been converted into a hydrocarbon yet. Right. And so, you know, where can you tell us where you're harvesting, where your mine is?
The harvesting is done in North America. It's in the U.S. just because that's currently where it is. But we're currently qualifying a different source that is Canadian. Okay. It's actually out here in BC. Having a consistent product because of regulatory compliance, we have to submit samples about 20 times a year randomly to CFIA for the Canadian registrations to ensure that we have, the heavy metals, any microbials, all of those need to be well below any acceptable limits. So our source is a North American source, but there are loads of sources globally. So there's a lot of access to the raw material. The process, obviously, we're super proud that we have this unique process that gives us a very clean, highly concentrated, highly soluble product with these unique charge. And it's not the source material that leads to the unique charge. It's the actual process in which they're extracted. But yeah, as you were saying, like the chemical component of the extraction process, it is a big part of what you can extract directly from the source, or for some fulvic acids, for example, they'll extract from a humic acid source. So you'll usually get a trace humic acid. And this is where the confusion is in somewhere like California, is that they're claiming that trace element of humic acid. So if you see a humic acid product, but it's like 0.06%, it's probably fulvic acid, but they just can't say it. So this misguidance on what the role is of each of these products it's really hard. And I think that's our biggest challenge has been that learning curve, especially where, our California counterparts and the people we work with there, they're like, yeah, I could go to the shop and buy a humic. And I'm like, but you don't know what you're buying. If you look at the pH of it, if you have a humic acid that's like a 6.8, I'd really question putting that in your system, because as soon as there's any further pH down, you're going to have precipitate, you're going to have clogged lines, it's going to contribute to biofilm. It's going to be problematic. And I think historically, where people have, you talk to farmers and you say, oh, I've got a liquid carbon. They're like, I've tried carbon. No, thanks. It's just gummed up my irrigation system. Don't want to use it. Because of the way that it had been, or previous techniques in which people were extracting were the source material wasn't ground fine enough, or it wasn't as a clean quality. So there was heavy metal contaminants. There was other issues that were problematic with the formula or the product. And there's lots of humics you can find online that are powdered. You lose that charge when you go to a dried formula. And when you reconstitute it, now you're looking at what is the quality of the water that I'm dissolving this powder into, and you need to give it time to sort of acclimate into that liquid environment, and then do all your testing and pH testing and all of that. It becomes onerous. I mean, the alternative is that you take a ground leonardite or a humic powder and you just add it right into the soil and mix it in. But now you're relying on the microbiology to break that down. So now it's going to take some time. So in a living soil environment, that's great. They're turning their soil over. They're reutilizing their soil. In a lot of till farming, it works okay there as well. Again, they're going to see results over years, not immediately. So again, it's the time that you're investing into it. When you're in a highly converting environment like indoor greenhouses, produce greenhouses, where they're going to have 3 to 4 crops a year, having a carbon powder that's going into their liquid system, they're very reticent to doing that. That's probably hundreds of thousands of dollars of hang up if they've got to spend a week or two flushing a system. They could be producing 10,000 kilos of cucumbers off of a 2-acre parcel in a greenhouse. That's a lot of revenue lost over a 2 to 3 week span to try to clear out a system. So there's a lot of hesitation in greenhouse environments and closed environments, just because historically the products have had some challenges in more contained distribution. If you're spraying out into a field, usually the valves are big enough that it's not going to be too much of an issue. But as we were talking about the reservoirs, yeah, it's actually a benefit to keeping those lines easier to be more readily cleaned out. And in fact, humic and fulvics can be used in septic systems. So you can actually use them to biodegrade organic material in anaerobic digestive environments that they perform in a lot of different ways. So it was interesting when we started with this. We started with agriculture. We started with plant agriculture because we were really passionate about plants and food security. In Canada, with cannabis being legalized is when we sort of got started. We're like, this is going to be a great opportunity to bring some of this into commercial cannabis production and hemp, because there's a lot of benefit that these plants can provide. So let's get behind this. And it quickly spilled over. We started to see the animal, like the livestock benefits. And then it spilled even further over. And we're like, but if animals, then people. And we know that when people consume fulvic acid in particular, it can resolve a lot of symptoms from a lot of different ailments. And we see that. So the spillover effect was just really quite almost overwhelming, because we just dove down into all these rabbit holes kind of at the same time. A 4-year span is a very short amount of time to dive into 3 different industries. But we just saw the benefit of all 3 realms. So we just kind of couldn't hold back.
Well, they're all connected, right?
Yeah, it's hard to be like, well, we'll go here because that one is, and that one's not so important. Like the people aren't that important. I have several health issues. I have a few autoimmune disorders. So when I was first introduced that I could take this and how it would benefit me, it's been very much a game changer for me. I have hypothyroidism. I have celiac disease. I have Raynaud's. I have a lot of food allergies. And I've found by being consistent with having fulvic in particular for me, we are going to be releasing a Humic fulvic combination product soon. We're just getting a bunch of testing done. But our fulvic product has been, we were taking it before we even flavored it. So it was just the fulvic acid.
The flavored version tastes amazing.
Yeah. It's a ginger citrus. It's just like having a bit of a little spicy lemon tea. It's delicious, and it's so easy to consume. It's just a capful. It's 5 ml. It's a teaspoon once or twice a day. And the results, it's been, I think the most gratifying thing is to hand samples out to friends and family, or just people within our network, and within days just check in and be like, so how are you feeling? How are you finding it? They're like, oh my gosh.
Right.
So you have a visceral reaction within a few days where people can be like, especially right now, we've been focusing on people who have SIBO, like really focusing on gut biome, because it is a challenge for a lot of people. Like people who say, I have IBS, a lot of them probably have SIBO. And whether their doctors have tested them for it or not, most don't. But if they have been tested for it, we've found that within a few days, or within a week, generously, within a week or 2, they're coming back and saying, I have not had any symptoms. And it's not a miracle cure. It's just really just something that helps the body better acclimate to whatever the issue is. And if you're better able to absorb your nutrients and your minerals, you have a stronger immunity, your body can combat the imbalance, but it's also going to promote, because it is a carbon, it is going to act as a prebiotic. So it's going to promote your beneficial bacteria. It's going to promote the probiotics, especially if you're taking a probiotic to provide a food source. It's going to be really important to do that. So it's really fun to kind of dive down and experience other people's or share in other people's experiences, from reduced inflammation, joint pain, rheumatoid arthritis. These are ailments that people are living with and sort of just dealing with, and have accepted that this is the level of pain that they have to deal with, or the discomfort that they have to deal with, and they don't. There's simple dietary changes that can improve. It doesn't replace their diet. I have to take certain supplements, but I find that it does help. I don't have to take as many of those supplements, and I'm getting the same results as if I were had a higher level of that. So, we see the same thing in plant nutrient programs. We can reduce the amount of nutrients by 15 to 25%. So we can do the same thing with people.
Yeah, it goes back to that mucus. Right, you're building that mucus, which is therefore digesting those, anaerobically digesting those minerals in a available form that you can uptake. So I can see how it would be hugely beneficial. What happened? That was new. So
quick intermission, just a quick.
Mixing it up there, Oz. So please do share, what are the benefits you have found? You told us what you've been suffering. Now, how did they benefit you when you started?
So for me personally, I have Hashimoto's. So my hypothyroidism is an autoimmune. I've had 2 kids. I learned of my Hashimoto's when I had my daughter, who's 11 and almost 10 and a half now, almost 11. I was through my blood work when I was pregnant that I discovered that I was hypothyroid. And through pregnancy, my medication was pretty balanced. I had my son almost 5 years ago, coming up to 5 years ago. Basically after that, through my pregnancy and through the first probably 2 years postpartum, my levels were all over the place. My medication would swing. I basically had 3 or 4 different dosages, and every time I got my blood work done, I'd have to like switch the dosage to the one that was sort of fitting where my blood work was. So everything was kind of all over the place. I had a lot of food allergies and food sensitivities, so I would constantly be in flare. And then I learned in 2019, just at the cusp of 2020, that I in fact had celiac. So I'd gone through my entire life, and I look back and I'm like going through with my gastroenterologist, and he's asking like, did I have these kind of symptoms? I'm like, yeah, like since I was 13. He's like, you've had celiac this whole time. And I'd been tested for it, and it came back inconclusive or as a no, or it was cleared, but I'd had celiac the whole time. So all of these GI issues, skin rashes, different symptoms that I was experiencing, I had no idea that it was celiac. And then once at this cusp, we were finally kind of getting into, so fulvic is really good for gut health too. So I'm going to start taking that. So I just started taking the pure fulvic acid. The unflavored, so really just kind of tastes like dirty lemon water is the only way that I can fairly attribute the taste. But it was great. Just throw it in some water. I would throw it in some juice, and I would take like a juice shot and just take it in that. Take it every morning. I just felt better. I felt I was better tolerant if I had cross-contamination. My flares went down a lot faster. I felt that I'd been leveled out. And then as my blood work progressed with my Hashimoto's, my doctor's like, interestingly, like everything's leveled out. Okay, I'm really happy. I'm like, you know what I think it is? She said, I explained to her, I'm like, I'm taking fulvic acid. And she thought I meant folic acid. She goes, yeah, it's going to give you folate. I'm like, that's not what I said. Fulvic acid. I sent her some studies because there were some in vivo studies with swine, and swine, because of the fat meat ratio to fat and muscle ratio, they're very similar to humans. And so there's a lot of pre-human testing that's done on swine. And there was a lot of in vivo studies with swine showing improved iodine uptake. And iodine is a really important part of thyroid health. So that was sort of the big connector to me. I'm like, I should be taking this more often, because if it's working on thyroid or iodine uptake in pigs, it's going to work with anybody who has any kind of thyroid dysfunction. So that's when I started really diving in and taking it, and my levels just leveled off. So my TSH started leveling off, and I didn't have to take these wild, I just settled on one dosage for my medication, and it's been consistent now for a good 2 years. So I found that for me, it was just the mineral uptake, being able to digest better. If I did fall into a flare, if I did have cross-contamination, which inevitably happens because gluten is in the most wildest of places in food. So I do find that I do get cross-contamination. I find that because I'm taking it regularly, I'm taking fulvic regularly, I find that the flare dissipates a lot more quickly. I recover faster. And a big part for me with my Hashimoto's is dehydration. I find my skin is less dry, my nails are stronger, my hair is grown stronger. I don't have as much breakage because I'm obviously taking in the minerals and nutrients that I need to produce stronger, healthier skin, hair, and nails. So those are some of my bigger symptoms that have tended to kind of resolve entirely. I still do take my medication. I still have stuff that I need to take, but I find that I'm not taking as much or as high of a dosage of some of the supplements that my GI and my neurologist had recommended or suggested for me. I don't have to take as much. I get the same results. I still have to take some supplements, but I just don't have to take as many.
It sounds so much like what I usually recommend to cannabis growers in crisis. I tell them, hit it with fish brew, hit it with humic acid, and hit it with kelp. Because now you got hormones, you got the humics that are going to help chelate and balance the arguments and infighting amongst the chemistry. And of course, the biology is going to just smooth everything out. So yeah, I'm not surprised at how it benefits you in your disease issues, because what you're saying is exactly what we see in those circumstances. And Silly Lily, tag that question, Ken, that Silly just put up at 5:58. All right, we definitely want to talk a little bit more about that in a little bit. Yeah, he popped and went. All right, so good. So back to the other benefits that we have not talked about of fulvic specifically is its atomic weight. Because it's so small and so light that it can penetrate inner and outer cell walls of bacteria on up, which is why it works so well, because it's not only chelating and attracting that mineral, but it's allowed to penetrate those membranes easily, instead of something that, like a big molecule, they can't even get close to it. So they can
carry a significant amount of ions with it, which is so great. So it really is a transporter. Yeah, there's the analogy that I use, and I've talked to some people about like it being an acid. Acids aren't always corrosive. It's just this chemical formation, the class of molecule that it is. There's a lot of acids that are non-corrosive that are attractors. Hyaluronic acid is an example for people know that more commonly in skincare. Is it can carry 1,000 times its weight in water molecules and allow for better absorption. Well, fulvic acid kind of plays that same role, is that it's a tiny molecule that's very focused on getting through tissues. So it can actually, when it's used, especially as a foliar spray, for example, fulvic or humic acid, I always focus on that as whatever's going to be in and around the root zone. So you use humic acid wherever's going to be around the root, amend the soil, work with the soil biology. That's where humic acid is going to play its role. Fulvic acid is interesting because it can be used foliarly. So you can spray it onto the canopy, and it serves a role there as well as it does when you're mixing it with nutrients and running it through your line fertigation, or mixing it in with your humics into your media. As a foliar, again, same thing, is that it attracts nutrients, it attracts those ions, holds on to them, and absorbs them into the plant tissues. So it doesn't absorb just into the tissue where it's sprayed or where it's uptaken into the roots. It assimilates through the entire plant. So the beauty of that is that it creates a new, almost like a pathway through the plant. It joins in with all cells within that plant. So it allows for better movement and migration of those nutrients. So translocation of nutrients, especially the immobile nutrients, which can be really tricky. You can mix fulvic into your reservoir, feed it to the plant as part of their nutrient. It can be taken up through the roots, but sometimes certain nutrients will get locked in along the way, and you get lost when you need it in the canopy. So you can blend fulvic as part of your foliar, and same thing with skin tissue, is that it's going to absorb through that tissue. It's going to absorb into those through those cell walls. It's a really interesting. It's an interesting function of the product itself.
Leah, do you want to share a little bit about? I think you had some case studies using the F2 foliar. I believe it was with cucumbers.
Yeah, the cucumbers wasn't the foliar. That was just the humic and the fulvic. Okay. So the couple of the case studies we've had. So just to start with the cucumbers, we worked with the cucumber large facility out in BC. And they focused on using the humonic and the pholonic. So our humonic product is our humic acid and a kelp extract blended together. And then our fulonic is our pure fulvic acid with nothing else in it. They're two tools in your toolkit. You can use them synergistically or you can use them independently, which is the beauty of why we've done it this way. So what they did was we did an initial trial with them as in the spring of 2022, where we just used our Humic. They grow in cocoa bags. And they have usually about a 13-week crop cycle. Depending on the cultivar, it could be up to 17 weeks. But we ran a trial with them from week 6 through to the end of, I think it was a 13 weeks that they ran on that crop cycle. It was a little slower of the short cycles, of the short crops. But we were anticipating, we gave them sort of a ballpark of where we figured we might see in terms of increase in yield for them. They were not convinced. So we said, we'll just run the trial. You guys can see. They've never used a humic or a fulvic in their system, in that facility before. And on their initial first trial, we did 2 trials with them. The first one, they ended up with a 2-acre section is what we trialed on. And they saw an extra 6,000 kilos of cucumbers coming off of a 2-acre section, which was beyond what they had anticipated. They were expecting maybe 1 or 2% would be great to see. But we ended up showing them about what worked out to be about 8.5% of what the control section produced. We produced another 8.5%. So to revalidate and run another trial, we decided to change it up a little bit, and we used our humic and our fulvic. So they're getting that sort of joined relationship between the 2 products. So not only were they line injecting into that one section, we changed up sections so we'd have sort of a fresh patch. But the second trial, we ended up with almost 15,000 kilos coming off of that same size section. So it just shows how the uptake can make a huge difference. One, if you're treating the root zone, and this is what we saw in the initial trial, was there was about a 200 to 300 gram per bag difference in weight that was attributed to root mass. And even though that seems not so big when you're in just a cocoa brick, it's sizable for that small space. But it just means that there's more surface area for the roots to naturally and not take in more nutrients that are being pumped through. When we integrated the fulvic acid, typically we would want to integrate the fulvic acid into the nutrient reservoirs as well. But because we're trialing on one section within a larger facility, we were relegated to just line injecting. So at least the bag would have access to the fulvic acid. Any retained nutrients that was already held in with the humic would get chelated with the fulvic acid. And so we saw those benefits there. But that turned into about an 11.5% increase in yield on that particular crop. So we did see a significant portion increase from them. So we're now through this network. We're also going to be running some tomato trials as well. We've got a greenhouse in Mexico that's going to start running trials over there. They go through a heat lull. They shut down over the summertime because it's too hot. So we're going to be doing a bit of trial through their facility in the summertime. And then starting again in their production timeline in the fall. But we're also opening up into peppers. So the three main crops in greenhouse that we're looking at are the tomatoes, cucumbers, and peppers. So that was it was really eye-opening, I think, for them to also see that they could average a good 10% increase in yield. And for a commercial facility where, again, they're reining in their costs, they're dealing with, their energy costs are extremely high because natural gas costs are very high, that whatever they can do to produce more with more efficiency is what they're looking to do. So this is a really great way we've been able to validate with them in their own facility that they have these boosts in yield that can contribute to their overall revenue and reduce costs. And then our other trials that we've done as well has been in cannabis. And I think it's probably my favorite one to showcase. It's a facility that's in Ontario. And we did a trial of about 4,500 plants. We did 4 different strains, all hydroponic, grown in cocoa. And each strain had 3 troughs assigned. So one was our trial group, and we had 2 flanking checks. to complement. And they all were cloned at the same time. They were all provisioned at the same time. They're all at the same stage. And throughout their trial, varying on strain, they were noticing obviously the physiology of the plants of the treated group just looked a little greener, looked a little bit more vigorous. They were super happy with how things were progressing. And then at one point, one of the sections, their fertigation system broke, and they weren't able to line feed anything. So all they could do was water. So for a period of about a week, I think it was about 6 or 7 days, that they were unable to actually feed nutrients. Our trial group, which had been the cocoa media, had been pre-treated with our Humic product, and they had been feeding with using our fulvic as part of their nutrient program. Even though they couldn't fertigate, all they could do was water. After that week, they saw a vast difference, double the density, really. If you look at the photos, it's double the density of our treated group compared to the flanking troughs. They just looked like they were cropped at different times. They looked like they were, good couple of weeks apart. And the reason that there is a continued vigor and growth and progression within the quad treated plants was because they had more nutrients available at the root zone, because it had been treated with Humic and the humic acid, and had fulvic was part of that program. There was more nutrients accessible by those plants, even though they were only being watered and there was no other nutrient in there. So in times of stress, or where there are situations or environmental pressures that can happen in a controlled environment, which inevitably do happen, temperature suddenly swings high, or the temperature is suddenly cold and things start to slow down, your plants are better able to adapt to those situations, and you have that kind of buffer period to fix things. So even though, and they even found at the end that the plants in that particular strain that were treated performed well beyond what their baseline for that cultivar was. But even the controls in that group still were performing and ultimately performed lower than their baseline. So we not only saved the plants from being decremented in terms of their performance, they still outperformed. So even in times of stress, we do see a continued progression of those plants. And
I think that's, it's great. It's great insurance. You talked about environmental stresses, and of course, especially for outdoor growers, you're going to run into those challenges with climate chaos. But I think the economic stresses too.
Yeah.
So I think the cannabis industry is a perfect example where we don't have the same amount of money to be making sure that we have every nutrient or have excessive nutrients. So we probably want to dial back part of it. A good plan for environmental sustainability to pull back some of our nutrients, and if you have a biostimulant that's working so well that you can actually reduce your input costs of your fertilizers because you're getting increased uptake, or in the case of soil, increased retention as well. It's going to be a good return on investment. I was hinting at that one trial that you talked about, in which they stopped doing the trial because they wanted to use the product on everything in their greenhouse.
That's happened a few times.
Yeah. You hate that as a scientist.
It's really skewed our data resource. It's happened it's actually happened quite a few times where people have been really excited when they start to see how things have been developing, how things are progressing with our trial group, that they just go, we're just going to add it to the whole room. And I'm like, my data. Because it's really important to show people that comparison, especially if they're already using a Humic and fulvic, and to have a comparison of why I use this product, how's yours going to be different? And then they just switch it partway through. I'm like, no, I want people to be able to see that they can. Humic and fulvic is wonderful. I want everybody to use a Humic and fulvic, whether it's ours or whether it's another brand. I really believe wholeheartedly in the benefit of these products. When you're producing for flavor, for quality, for quantity, they really are. It's an easy addition to any system. But yeah, there's been a couple of those. There's a fellow that was out east that we sent product out, just said, just give it a try. He grows really, really big trees, cannabis, very big trees. And he started feeding just a couple of his trees, and they started to grow his average to about like 6 foot in width. And then the ones that he treated grew to about like 9 feet in width. And he's just like, oh, forget this. I'm just going to feed it to everybody. We're like, awesome. But I would have loved to have seen at the end what the differences would have looked like, because that, like, those are when people, especially dedicated growers that have been doing this for a long time, they're passionate about their plants. They know their strains very well. Whatever the cultivar is, it's the same thing with the guys in the apples and the cherries. And the vineyards is always a really fun area to get into as well. When they understand their plants very, very well, and they get excited about seeing progression and seeing that performance improvement, that's makes me super happy. It's something that we do experience. I mean, with our foliar product, so we have our one humic based product, and then we have 3 fulvic products. Our fulonic is just our fulvic acid, which is highly adaptive. You can use it as a foliar product. You can blend it into an IPM program. If you're using it for if you're doing any kind of pest sprays or PM sprays, you can blend it into a lot of different things. Our F1 is our only product that's not organic because it does use an ammonium sulfate. It really helps to boost growth early in a veg phase. Again, you have the chelating power of the fulvic acid with whatever else is in your nutrient program, but that boost of nitrogen and sulfur really helps to improve growth and tissue build in an early veg phase. It also, in an outdoor environment, helps to stabilize nitrogen in the ground as well, which is where you need it. So it reduces leaching and gas off. Our other products, so the third of our organic products is our F2 foliar. So that's a fulvic acid base, but we blend boron, manganese, zinc, and sulfur. So all 4 of those components really improve photosynthesis. It helps to support the chlorophyll production and different processes there. You see a greening up of the canopy. You see a vigor and an attentiveness within the plants very shortly. So we've had a fellow that he does all regenerative agriculture. He was using another fulvic product as a foliar and used our foliar product. They sprayed in the morning, sort of 2 sides of a hybrid greenhouse, outdoor greenhouse. The whole team went around the property, came back and looked at the room about 6 or 7 hours later, and they just saw a difference in how the treated side, the quad treated side, was just perkier. Leaves were standing at attention. It was elevated. There was just a vigor and an enthusiasm in the plants that wasn't representative with the other application. So their whole team was like, what is this? And so they bought a barrel. They're like, we're going to use this all the time. This is great. So it's really encouraging, and I feel really good when I see other people see the success within their own programs and within their own facilities. I think my happiest moment was actually with a vineyard. Back in 2021, BC was hit really hard with forest fires. We were under a heat dome where temperatures peaked at about, in some regions, 56 degrees. I think the most famous catastrophe was Linton burned down, a whole city burned down. We went into a couple of vineyards in the South Okanagan and Soyuz area, which is down south, and it gets very, very hot down there. They were hit by a lot of the fires as well. So there was a lot of smoke cover. There was a lot of a lack of photosynthesis because it was just so smoky. Plus the heat was causing a huge amount of stress. And so there's a lot of solar burn. A lot of the vines just weren't tolerating the heat very well, least of all the fact that it was really dry. They were using the sprinklers really just to try to, as fire protection, not so much feeding. They're really trying to protect the properties. But again, when growers know their yards, they know their spaces, they know their plants really, really well, to go in and do a site visit and visit with these guys and be like, how are you finding things? And the feedback being, we know it's subjective, but they're like, yeah, no, the treated is just tolerating all of this way better. I'm like, in what way? Like, I can't see through your lens. So tell me what you see in your vines. And the response was, well, there's just a lot less solar burn, and you can see that. And you can see there's a lot less red tone to the treated sections. There was just a bit more greening. You can see that there's visibly more green. It was less solar burn. They were producing a little bit more. They weren't stunting the same way under the heat stress. So they were able to, again, self-regulate under that stress. But the most interesting part, which at the end, and you won't know this, again, this is sort of that insurance policy, you won't know until you go through that. Once they go through the fermentation process, with grapevines or with grapes off the vine for wine especially, yan and Brix are two really important factors of the composition of that fruit. So the Brix is the sugar and the yan is the yeast attributable nitrogen. So this is what the yeast is going to consume through fermentation. So you need the sugar, you need the nitrogen. Having those two components in higher quantity and higher quotients within that fruit is what they saw in our product, in the sections that were treated with our product versus the control. So through fermentation, the initial fermentation didn't need any support with our product. So we were able to allow those grapes to perform better, pull up the right kind of nutrients so that they could perform better. And through the maturation process, and while they had through the fermentation process, they had pulled out their samples at several months later as they were checking the wine to transfer them into barrels. And they found that the flavor profile was completely different from our treated group to the control group. So because the control group needed some support and additives during the initial fermentation, which is immediately going to change the flavor profile, having a higher yan is very much correlated to that mid-palate flavor within wine that only comes from that yan. So it's a really important part of, and it's something that they measure and they closely monitor. So in the end, they ended up with a product that closely resembled the grape varietal of those vines versus the control group came out tasting like a different varietal altogether. So from an insurance policy or sort of an insurance measure from commercial producers, if you're growing a product to produce something like a wine, that flavor profile is very important to the grade of the wine and how much they can garner at market for that product. So having the same block, same varietals, but one half of it coming out as a completely different flavor puts it at a different grade. Whereas, when you have the right components as part of the nutrient program, it's a safety measure to ensure that you're protecting the integrity of that product in the end. So for produce growers, for cannabis growers, if your plants are better able to self-regulate and pull in the right nutrients and the right minerals, you're producing a more accurate presentation of what that plant is meant to produce.
I was dying to ask you about the effects of stressing and how this works on stressing. I know the answer, but and Av jumped in before I could say anything. But you hit it. You just went down stressing and how valuable this product is in dealing with things that you have no control over. And you're inevitably going to run into problems.
And you can't predict it.
Yeah, you can't stop it. It's nature. Or in human condition, we call it Mrs. Murphy, because Mr. Murphy's bad, but Mrs., don't mess with her. She's taking right out. So are there other cases or examples that you can talk about on how well this product works in stressed environments?
Sure. Well, I think heat stress is probably the most, the most obvious for a lot of people is like, how do you manage and how do you mitigate heat stress, especially in controlled environments? So, I'm a big proponent for controlled environment because it's for the sustainability of it. Outdoor isn't always functional for all crops. So I'm split between the two. From an indoor environment, obviously the heat stress is a big part. If a plant is better able to self-regulate, it can tolerate sudden swings in temperature and humidity and things like that. But also in controlled environment, you have because you are controlling the environment, that if things do go awry, now you have pathogenic issues that can reap up, and you have like fusarium and pythium and botrytis that are omnipresent in commercial environments. And that if your plants have a better immunity and can regulate itself better, they're more adept at being able to fend off pathogens. So that's one factor. There's other things that you can step in to support, and like inoculations and different things. But by incorporating humic and fulvic, you're sort of creating a baseline that the plant is going to be able to better regulate itself in those times of stress. And hopefully they're not long-term, but there are pockets of stress that the plants can then adjust back from. In outdoor environments, you're now dealing with all of the elements. So wind, rain, hail, and especially wind can be really problematic for row crops and things like that, where they need a stronger root development to get into the ground, not only for accessing nutrients, but holding the plant up in times of stress and wind. So we found that there's instances where you can see treated and untreated, where a wind, like in row crops for corn, for example, where wind has barreled through in a region and the untreated corn, for example, has just toppled over because they don't have a strong enough root mass and they don't have enough integration deeper into the soil. Whereas in the treated sections, they may look battered and bruised, but they're still standing. So the resiliency to the environment in outdoor crops is definitely there. Their crop formation as well, the temperature fluctuations, all of those things are kind of, there's some similarities in the outdoor and indoor, but the wind is the bigger challenge in the outdoor. And if you're dealing with row crops, for example, wind is a big issue because it can take down a field in no time, depending on where regionally you are. I'm also finding in orchards that we are seeing sort of year after year, you do see an improvement in the production, especially post-stress. You can stimulate the plant that in big times of stress, like under the heat dome, some plants or orchards, like the trees, are either going to root down to find more moisture, or they're going to bud. So you're going to have one, they're going to go in either direction. They're either going to go to the roots or they're going to go to propagating for the next season. But whatever you do this year is what you're going to see next year. So when we can see that compound benefit, we see that overall growth. Usually in the outdoor environment, what we really try to look for is improvement within the soil. So we're looking at what is their current CEC, what is the soil composition, what's their organic matter ratio at right now, and how can we look to improve that so that it's overall year over year going to improve how that plant or that tree that is going to pull up its nutrients and produce for the following year. So yeah, in times of stress, there's a lot of things that you cannot control. So our goal is to try to alleviate some of the stress and give a bigger window for recovery, but also for in situations of a controlled environment that the team can get in and make the adjustments that are necessary to bring things back to where they need to be.
I love that you went to the secondary things, right? The primary stress opens the door for all kinds of other things to come in now and cause, secondary, tertiary problems that, again, if the plant had been just strong enough to survive that one event, you were not dealing with the continued consequences of that event. So yeah. I'm so glad. I was hoping you were going to go there, because a lot of people, I want to thank you, because your depth of knowledge is incredible. And clearly you're passionate about it, and it shows, and the way you're speaking, as well as the ability for you to share the knowledge back, because nobody gets the fact that you have a stress event, you can recover. You're not going to just start chasing it and fighting it the whole way down to the negative end that you're going to end up in. So thank you again.
Yeah.
I just want to bring up one other stress too, which I think ties in so well to what Fish Brew offers. But also maybe, Leah, if you could speak around the bioremediation or treatment of even things like heavy metals that both humonic and fulonic can provide both cannabis growers and those who are dealing with the environmental stresses of contamination.
Yeah, contamination. I'm actually working on a project right now that is dealing with high salinity soils. And so trying to remediate soils. I mean, this is basically they're irrigating out of a brackish aquifer. So it's, it's going to be a perpetual issue. But any kind of heavy metals or toxins, humic acids are chelators as well, but they're going to bind to the more challenging of molecules in the soil environment. They kind of serve in that, like, the heavier remediation really does come from the humics. Fulvic is going to take those sort of more active nutrients and make them more bioavailable. But yeah, there's a lot of our opportunity to work in wastewater treatment. If you're dealing with algae bloom, again, as you'd mentioned, like just darkening the water, that can make a huge impact on remediating algae out of irrigation ditches, for example. If you're in a field, what you get out, what you put in. So if you're putting in contaminated water, it's not going to be, you're just going to have contaminated soil, which is going to harm the plants, or at least reduce the productivity of the yield of that crop. So in terms of like heavy metals, I mean, it's still an area that I'm diving in a little bit more. So I'm certainly no expert in toxics and in remediation, but I've got some learned people amongst us that we could certainly dive into that some more. But yeah, there's definitely an application for it. It doesn't eliminate the matter portion of those toxins. It will bind to heavy metals and make them less available, which is beneficial on the agriculture side of things. But when you're dealing with wastewater treatment, you still need to have a physical removal process. So that's still something that isn't eliminated, but you can still contribute to making that process a little bit easier, and you're taking the right parts out and you're getting more of that buildup and leaving, the water behind, but you're getting more of that buildup out of those tainted waters or affected waters.
I think those in the regulated cannabis market that have to address cadmium, mercury, arsenic, and lead. Yeah. One of the real benefits of having something like humonic getting into that soil, especially in a living soil bed, is that it will give off extra electrons, right? So because it's so heavily charged, those metals will take on even more electrons, and then they become even less available for the plant to take up. So it's one of those things. Yeah, it's not going to get rid of it out of your bed. Yeah, but it's going to make it even harder for that plant uptake of those metals.
Yeah, I mean, if they don't have these RO systems, and not all facilities can afford. These are very expensive systems. So some of even the craft cultivators that are just relying on their city water, they're not able to. I mean, it's a huge cost to put in an actual mechanical system to remove these heavy metals out of the water that's available to them. So what is something that they can use? They can use a humic. They can use something like this that will just bind off those heavy metals and those ions to make them less readily available. And if they're stuck in a situation where they can't afford a mechanical system to help reduce some of that, or have some form of filtration system that helps to reduce that, this is something that they can absolutely and cost effectively. I think the most important thing is it is cost effective. Humic and fulvic shouldn't be an arm and a leg. I think with our full program, we've got it dialed into at the full bore of our program integrated into your system. For a full crop, it might be 50 cents a plant. So it's really not that expensive if you can increase the yield, the flavor, the quality, if it can improve the terpene profile, your cannabinoid profile. If your plant is alleviating the environmental stressors that it's dealing with, and sometimes there are stressors that you can't see that is causing it to not uptake as well, that if you can eliminate that or reduce that greatly, you're going to see this in the chemical analysis. You're going to see it perform in the plant. Not only is the plant going to look better and have bigger colas or produce a bigger fruit, whatever you're growing for, the flavor profile is going to be a bit more pronounced, and you're going to get a better quality. I'm also looking at ways that I'm trying to find a way that we can, I'm working with the lab to try to dial down a test that we can actually take the fruit itself that's been grown with our fulvic acid and take it to the lab and detect the fulvic acid in the fruit, because we know it's in there. So how do we actually test it and validate that it's being retained within the fruit? Because that's normally in antiquity, when our produce is grown in soil, that's how we would get it. That's how we would access the fulvic acid. So
another question for you. Have you ever looked into how humic acid affects secondary disinfectant byproducts? So this is a huge concern for water resources. So we as a species chlorinate or chloramine our water.
Yeah.
When that chloramine comes in contact with organic matter, not humic acid, but organic matter,
yeah,
it attacks that there's a reaction that's occurring, and these secondary disinfectant byproducts are very toxic to humans and plants. And so some of the work I did right at the beginning of COVID was playing around with how, because I extract humic acid from plants. So how did that affect it? And it was a really interesting deep rabbit hole that may actually end up leading you to another place that you hadn't thought about, which is water purification and how to deal with the water that they're discharging out into our coastal waterways, rivers, and streams. By adding a certain percentage of your product, they would be reducing those byproducts.
Well, first thing is I'm a huge fan of hypochlorous acid.
Why aren't we using it? But
it really shocks me that it isn't more talked about, and that the emphasis on like chlorine bleaches being and is, why wouldn't you use a disinfectant that is going to, as a residual, leave water and chloride, which is nutrient? Why wouldn't you leave it with something that's beneficial?
Like you get two products out of it.
Easy switch.
You get a cleaner and a friggin' disinfectant.
Totally.
And then they go back to water.
And it can be used in so many different ways, which blows my mind. You can fog it as a disinfectant in a facility. If you need like a big, deep clean sanitation, you've had a major fungal bloom, you need to disinfect every surface. You can use it that way. You can use it as a line disinfection. You can actually, at a low ppm, even fog it on plants to get rid of PM. Like, it does so many good things. Like, I don't know why people aren't using more and more of it. I know that there's the perception that it's more expensive, but when you have one product that can be used in multiple different ways, it kind of pays for itself in that regard.
And it's very cheap to make.
You can make it yourself. Absolutely. You can make it on site yourself, and it's not that tricky. So yeah, I'm a big fan of hypochlorous for that reason, is that it from an environmental standpoint, there is no effluent, there's nothing damaging to the environment. But again, if what we do find, and this is, I think, where our approach is not necessarily on the wastewater treatment, but taking a step before that, and that the wastewater has less nutrient in the outflow, in the wastewater. So we're able to dial back the nutrients being used because we're making them more bioavailable, and more is being retained in and around the root zone. Then any drainage water is just going to have less nutrient in it. So you're going to have less waste, and it's going to be less detrimental to the environment. So kind of taking it upstream one step. And that way we can, again, improve efficiencies, improve like functional efficiencies, but also the cost efficiencies, and reduce the negative impact on the environment, especially in estuaries or environmentally sensitive areas, or like in Canada, where we're very respectful of the fact that we're on Indigenous land and we don't want to harm further the land that we have the privilege of living on. So I think that there's a very humanitarian approach in doing that. And at the same time, we're helping to increase the yield and the quality and the formation of the products that are being grown, regardless of what they are.
So well said. So well said. And yeah, you know, the piece that you missed too was that you're building aggregates, which are purifying water and holding more nutrients even away from the plant root zone.
Yeah.
So, you know, the impact of what you're doing upstream is huge, but that still doesn't help people, you know, downstream who are using, you know, mass septic systems or sewers, not septic, because septic is different. Septic is your own, where sewer goes to a main concentration point.
Yeah.
So, you know, again, if I was a billionaire, I'd get every single sewage treatment plant to be using your product as a way of preventing those secondary disinfectant byproducts, because that would be a huge way to further scrub the water before they discharge it into these very sensitive ecosystems that are, you know, on the verge of collapse already. But
and there are food source.
Right?
Like,
yeah, hello, the insanity of friggin' humanity. Anyway, listen, we're
you
done.
know, you say don't shiz where you eat. Well, that's kind of what we're doing. So.
Hey, if we listened to the indigenous, we'd still be drinking our groundwater. We'd still be able to go to a lake and pull out a glass of water without it. But anyway, so we're down to 20 minutes. We've got 5 questions, so I think we should probably dive into that. Sure. If we have time at the end, we can chop up some more things. So take it away, Ken.
I just want to say thank you for all the work you're doing and bringing this out to people. And for the guys, there is a 15% discount on these products if you use Ken Somerville at the checkout when you buy them, so you guys can get them at even a cheaper price. But we'll get into questions. Stupid questions, and no, there is never a stupid question. You would be using fulvic aim to pH down, correct?
Yes, because fulvic acid, the phenolic product, sits at about a 3.2. You're going to have a very low acidity. So if your reservoir is starting to get a little hot and your pH is raising, you can use the fulvic acid. Generally, we'd say start at about a 2 ml per liter if you're looking to pH down, and go from there. So add it to your reservoir and then regulate it and then check it. And then you can do another 2 ml per liter or 1 ml per liter, sort of graduated. But typically we found that it works really, really effective, and it's stable, which is, I think, the biggest benefit is that you get a pH down and it's stable, versus when we were talking about that yo-yo of going back and forth and having to constantly cross correct. You don't have to deal with that.
And that's a beautiful thing that everybody needs to consider, because, you know, it happens to everybody in that type of a system. And whether you're growing cannabis or not, it's all plants.
Yeah.
Yeah, yo-yoing is no fun.
No, it's a stress for you and the plants. It's
just a little bit. Yeah, just a little.
We're all stressing out here.
So was this the one, Leighton, that you were mentioning? Humic acid might cause the immune system to become more active, and this could increase the symptoms of autoimmune disease from WebMD?
Yeah, that's misnomer. That's misinformation. The thing that we're missing is humic and fulvic acids in our diet. If we had a healthy food, there would be so much less autoimmune diseases. I mean, look where they came out. Look at what time they really exploded in humanity. And it was after the fertilizer revolution or the green revolution, whatever you want to call it. But no, that's definitely absolutely wrong. I mean, I used to tell people, drink compost tea. Just make sure that you know that compost is not anaerobic and is healthy, and you're going to get those fulvic and humic acids. And people that did it had amazing turnarounds in their health, similar to what Leah had. Same thing. I didn't have access to her product 15 years ago, but I noticed in my own health, because I was constantly covered in compost or compost extracts, that all of a
Yeah.
sudden my health started getting better and better. So I'm a firm believer that, you know, we need those in our diet. We're just not getting them anymore. And so please strike that down as misinformation, that this would not in any way affect. The only thing that would affect our autoimmune diseases is Pseudomonas. Certain Pseudomonas bacteria can wreak havoc on you know, your immune system, or make things that are the underlying flare up. So again, you know, those are gram negative. They're you know, anaerobic biology. So you don't drink, you know, horse manure or cow manure, right? Use some common sense, but a really good aerobic compost, you mix it up in a little bit of water, and I've drunk it on the show before. It's very beneficial. So sorry, I didn't mean to go on a rant.
Oh, no problem.
No, and I think also, like, if you think about what we've talked about this before, but that humic acid helps to reduce gram-negative bacteria, and it helps to protect the gut, the mucus lining in the digestive system.
Yeah.
So that is, it's not going to contribute to something. We found, I've only had one experience where somebody had like a metal implant, and he found that he experienced some achiness in that joint. And I said, it could also be that tissue is getting more oxygen now because you have more nutrients coming into your system. You've got fulvic acid in your system now. And that pain and discomfort could be toxins or buildup that are now moving through. Like, that can cause some discomfort. And any kind of stress or discomfort can trigger autoimmune flares. I can tell you it does. but it in the long term of your overall health, humic acid is only going to really benefit in your digestive system. Fulvic acid is going to get more integrated into your cells. So I would have to see the study specifically, and I like to dig into studies. I have a whole library of studies on both agriculture, plant, livestock, and human that I dive into. So and like I said, I come from my father's a surgeon, so I come back from being highly analytical and getting right into the details of things. And if anything, that's why I've kind of fallen down this path, is it merges my scientific prowess and interest into my inner hippie. So, but yeah, I'd love to actually look into the actual study, because the thing with WebMD is that they summarize things, but you have to look into the actual studies that have been cited and look at what are they actually saying, and what are their conclusions, because sometimes they're sort of drawn from a conclusion. It's not quite that clear.
Sometimes they set up the experiment to get the response that they want.
Traffic to WebMD.
Yeah. So this kind of leads into the next statement from Lily. Folic acid has potential anti-inflammatory, antifungal, and antibacterial benefits for the skin. Conditions such as eczema and psoriasis. Sorry. Some people consume folic acid to treat digestive issues.
I 100% consume fulvic acid to treat digestive issues. And I can say unequivocally, because I used to get a celiac rash.
Okay.
And it would go everywhere. I thought I had shingles for a long period of time, but I'm like, it doesn't line up with the lymph lines. It couldn't figure it out. Dermatologist couldn't figure it out. Interestingly, my GI was like, it's a celiac rash. I'm like, that makes sense. And oftentimes they're triggered by stress. I haven't had a celiac rash in 2 years, and I would get them at least every month. Even if it was just on my fingers, if it was like on my forearm, like I would get them all the time. I haven't had one in probably a good 2 years since I started taking fulvic consistently. From the antibacterial, antifungal, there's definitely some studies that are correlating those benefits. There's a lot more that needs to be studied in human studies. There's a lot more in this area, but I think it is really opening up in the way that there's been such enthusiasm behind CBD and being so beneficial, and not just cannabis derived or hemp derived CBD. You can get CBD from a lot of different vegetal sources. There's a very big opportunity to dive in a little bit more on the human health component and human health benefit of this. From reducing, antifungal for psoriasis or antimicrobial antifungal for psoriasis and eczema. Yeah, we've got friends that have had really pronounced psoriasis or eczema on their hands. They'd go on vacation, they stop taking it, the psoriasis comes back, or their skin lesions come back. They get back on it and it resolves. So it definitely does. You think about that's inflammation. There is a bacterial component to that, or a fungal component to that, because your skin is a biome.
Big
Just
one.
like fish have the outer biome, so do we. And it's often neglected or overlooked at the very least. It's not just pretty, and it's not just melanin. There's a whole lot of biology going on in our skin. So yeah, there's absolutely a benefit there. And I'm working on a topical product for some of my friends that have pretty severe psoriasis.
Oh, I got one to share on that. Yes,
Okay.
Years ago when I was first making my product, I had a friend that had psoriasis. So I make this dried biological, and you just mix water to activate it. You wait 24 hours. So they made mud with it and put it on their psoriasis, and it healed them. So I was going to say, make it topical. Make it topical.
Oh, no. Believe me, a couple of the companies that I worked in the past has been in the cosmetics industry. So I've looked at that. I'm like, I really want to do a skincare line that's not just about beauty, but it's a wellness skincare. But I mean, there's a lot of here. But honestly, yeah, like colloidal clays, remineralizing the skin, improving the biome. Like that's really sort of the main focus that I'd like to address. But there's a lot of very specific and niche skin issues like psoriasis and eczema. Not only is it really uncomfortable for the person, but it's embarrassing, especially wherever it is. They tend to want to cover it up, and sometimes air is what you need. So it's definitely something that I'm looking down that path, and it's certainly you can use the pure fulvic. The fulonic that's what it is. You can literally just rub it right in. It works really well.
Oh, fantastic. I want to just bring up one thing that Jeff put out is I'm rolling in my compost after the show. Okay. I've been after Dragonfly Earth Medicine. I keep telling you I'm coming down. Don't forget to get buck ass
naked, brother.
Just make sure it's a quality compost. Okay. Yes. So Ganja was mentioning taproot vitality.
So like with germination.
Mm-hmm.
Yep. We've got a lot of, I think most of the commercial cultivators that we work with are propagators. But there's definitely a lot of genetics guys that are growing for seed and using seed and growing from seed. So we're definitely seeing that when you use humic and fulvic as part of the germination process, you're definitely seeing a much stronger taproot. We've seen some growers that have actually shown us like day 3, their little sprouts, and they've already got like a wide web of roots already. So it's really, really exciting to see that. So really depending on, it doesn't matter how you're growing. If you're growing it, it can help. So especially right from clone, I think it's interesting in the clone phase, it's such a stressful process for those baby plants that to be able to give them that little boost of energy from the foliar spray to help treat the rooting material with the humonic, because it has the humic acid. It also has the kelp extract. So you get the brassinosteroids, you get that root boost, you get the enzymes and B vitamins. Really, it's a cocktail to improve the root ecosystem. But it's also a prebiotic that if you are using beneficials, it's a food source for that population that you've spent money on to maintain those populations, that when the plants start to produce the exudate, that's the preferred food source. And so it's going to go for that. So it's that stopgap between the plant producing the buffet that those microbes really want to eat. It's a little bit of a snack bar. So
And let's
it gives the plant everything that it needs to get a really good rooting and to get good movement in those plants. And those first 4 to 6 weeks is critical for the end production. So what you do at the first 4 to 6 weeks and how you support that plant in the first 4 to 6 weeks really will be reflected in towards the end and in your harvest.
And Ken, let's not forget that the fulvic is actually stimulating the endophytic biology too, which is really important in seeds.
Yes, definitely. And I love the reference to the clones, because I use an air cloner, and this product would make, I think, my roots appear a lot faster in that air cloner if I was using it. But now you guys are based out of Vancouver, is that correct?
Yep. Yeah, we're based out of Vancouver. We already distribute across the US. We're self-distributed right now. We really work on an intimate level. If they're commercial cultivators, we really go in and try to show them how we can easily adapt into their system. But I'm usually the one answering the calls off the website and answering the chats. And I will gladly take a call with people and help them, even if it's their home garden. I'm non-discriminating. I just want people to enjoy their growing.
Thank you for that, because it means a lot to the whole community, and we're more about caring, sharing, and community. And that's a wonderful thing, right?
Absolutely.
So the last one, how much humic and fulvic would you put in a glass of water?
So in a glass of water, is this for human consumption?
I would say yes.
Okay.
Say yes.
So we have a product, and I should have had one here. I just realized that it drove off with my husband. But our Ionicade is our product. It's our fulvic acid. It's an electrolyte supplement. It's a concentrate, and we recommend using a 5 ml application in a glass of water. So it's a 5 milliliters of our product. It would give you about 3.5 milligrams of fulvic acid, along with other electrolytes and vitamin D3. So
now that's not on the website?
That's not on that website, but I can add into your link. We can get you a code for the Ionicade site as well, and I can get you that as well. So that if your viewers would like to try that, then I will absolutely give that a same discount code.
I know that I would like to try that, and I'm sure Leighton and Av, well, Av's already taking it because he was mentioning how tasty it was. So
yes, and we didn't get into dilution rates, and that was something I meant to.
Thank you.
That's it, huh? Nice.
All right. So guys, we'll have the code here soon for a discount for that as well, and the right website to go to get that one.
Absolutely.
There you go.
You were talking, sorry, Leighton, you were talking dilution.
Yeah. I wrote it down, and I wrote iodine and dilution, and we never got back to either one of those. So let's start with.
So with dilution, I've created a bit of an input program. I mean, over the years, I've dialed into helping people just on the mils per liquid volume basis. Generally, I'd say anywhere from like 1 to 2 milliliters per liter is a good starting point, because some people are very anxious about when you use a humic acid. It's black. It makes the water very dark. Even 1 milliliter per liter, it's very, very dark. You can't really see through a glass jar on the other side if it's 1 milliliter per liter. It gets very dark very quickly. And so for people who are used to having a sterile system and having everything really clean, it can be really intimidating. So starting at about 1 to 2 mil per liter is usually sufficient. I find that when you're dealing with, if you've got 15 to 20 plants. Let's say you're a home grower, or you've got a garden and you've got 20 plants in your bed. If you're feeding your plants 1 milliliter of humonic and phelonic per plant per week, it makes it really easy math if you're doing hand watering. If you've got 20 plants, it's 20 milliliters of each product. Mix it into whatever your nutrient solution, and you can feed it that way. It especially is helpful when you're growing at scale. And if you're an ACMPR and you've got a room of 200 plants, or if you are a much larger facility, or if you're doing cucumbers and you've got 22,000 stems in a 2-acre section, Doing a mils per liter can suddenly shift your input rate to be extraordinarily high, versus if you're working on a per plant basis and you have more controlled input and the feed is going to be more directed. If you have a more directed feed and there's less runoff, less waste, I find this is a really easy way to math the input, is that you do 1 mil per plant on a weekly basis of both the humonic and the fulonic. With the foliar, if you're doing a weekly foliar feed, or if you need to do repeated IPM treatments and you want to blend the foliar product into that, a 0.5% solution, so 5 mil per liter, is a really good input rate, because you're not going to overdo the boron. It gives you the opportunity to do multiple applications. If you're doing a lot of fogging and you're doing repeated applications, you can dial that back down. I have people that use a 1% solution multiple times a week. I'm preferring to say a 1% solution would be good for a once weekly to once every 2 week application, especially with outdoor, because they're looking at conserving water. So generally it's 1 mil per plant per week as a base, or about 1 to 2 mil per liter, depending on the water volume. Everyone's going to use a little bit of a different volume. So I try to be adaptive.
That was very well put. Very well put.
Yeah.
I'm so glad that you did that, because you are so right. When you get into dilutions, people lose their mind. They get crazy.
Yeah. And we don't impact the EC at all. The only thing that we impact is going to be the pH.
Yep.
So it keeps it really simple that way, that you balance your EC or your ppm on your reservoir, add quad products, regulate it or do a circulation or agitate, and then check the pH, and then you can do your adjustments from there. And that's it.
All right. And lastly, real quick, iodine. So this is one of the big ones that people are missing, especially if you're drinking distilled, desalinated RO water. If you do not have iodine in your diet, you got a problem. That's a real big effect on overall health. So can you speak on that a little bit?
So what I can speak to on that is that it's just yet another ion that is going to be chelated. And that I find that from the, at least from that swine study, to be able to show that there is an improvement in that, and they're looking for that specifically. But, I totally echo what you're saying about the RO water. You have demineralized water. You need minerals. Your body needs minerals. Your plants need minerals. Even in just plain watering, it doesn't need to be on the EC level. You're not talking ppm. We're talking trace. But having that mineral access to the minerals is really, really important. There's a variety of minerals that are that we need, both people, but also as any organism, that they're required for various metabolic processes. So if you limit access to those, now you're requiring supplementation, which is taking you back to why we need humic and fulvic to begin with. So for the people that I've talked to who flush and they're like, oh, I flush with RO water, I'm like, try just adding the fulvic, or just add a little bit of humic to it. Just have a little bit of mineral. It's not enough for your plant to be nourished, but it's going to signal to the roots that things are okay and they don't need to stress out. They can still do what they need to do. You can still go through the flush process, but you're not going to shock your plants. There's a stressor that happens, and it happens in the body too. Yeah, I think with the iodine, again, I'd like to dive in more into that, but it's I think it's a deeper rabbit hole.
Oh, it's a deep one. All right. It's a deep one. But I just wanted you to talk a little bit about that, because I think that's one of those traces that people are missing and don't realize how valuable it is.
Yeah. I mean, and especially for people. I mean, that's why we have iodized salt. So, I mean, you need access to it, but everything is so clean that we need to.
We don't get it.
Yeah, if you don't get it, you're deficient, and you're going to see the repercussions of that. So,
yeah. Well, listen, we've gone over, and I want to respect your time. Thank you so much, Leah, for coming on and being such a welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Such a beautiful spirit, and
Thank you so much.
Yeah, you rock on and keep bringing the word to all the people, the masses, because these are one of those things that it's a gateway into the rest of the pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah.
So, you're doing me a big service by selling
it. Thank you both so much for your knowledge and for sharing the space. I really, really appreciate it.
Well, we'll have you back on in 6 months or so and see what's going on. Because everything is in flux these days. So we'll have Ken stay in touch, and we'll see you again probably within a year.
Amazing. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you, Ken. Thank you so much. I think Av disappeared, so I can't thank him. But much love to all you guys.
Cheers. Thank you so much.
And with that, guys, we're going to end the show. Don't forget, I've got Andy on Wednesday and the new show with the Luna Files with Luna Whitcomb on Thursdays. So you're going to want to stay tuned for that this week. And I also have the Green Gold Games, an event that happened in Ontario that was very successful. And they want more live events in Ontario, live cannabis events. And we actually have the first event in Calgary held on city property legally. We have Dave Downer coming up on next Tuesday. So you're going to want to check that out and find out what's happening with cannabis consumption legalization across Canada. And with that, guys, we'll see you on Wednesday.